The wind howled a mournful dirge, a relentless symphony of ice and despair that ripped across the desolate landscape of northern Maine. December had arrived with a vengeance, not a gentle dusting of snow, but a brutal, suffocating blizzard that swallowed roads whole and painted the world in shades of unforgiving white. For days, the storm had raged, each swirling gust a physical assault, each fallen flake adding to an already overwhelming blanket that threatened to bury everything in its path beneath a precarious overhang of ice-laden pines. A German shepherd named Blizzard shivered uncontrollably, her body a taut knot of pure instinct and raw, unyielding fear. Her once glossy black and tan coat was matted with snow and ice, offering little protection against the sub-zero temperatures that gnawed at her bones. Her eyes, usually bright with intelligence, were now clouded with exhaustion and a desperate, primal worry. Just 2 weeks prior, a profound shift had occurred within her. A beautiful and terrifying miracle, tucked beneath her trembling belly, nestled into the shallow, snow-dusted hollow she'd scraped out, were 5 tiny, fragile bundles of fur, her pups. They were so small, so utterly dependent, their squeaks and whimpers barely audible above the storm's fury. She licked them ceaselessly, a desperate attempt to transfer what little warmth remained in her own emaciated body. Each lick was a prayer, a silent plea against the inevitable, and she knew, with the stark clarity of an animal facing its end, that they couldn't last much longer. Her milk, once abundant, was now barely a trickle, her strength draining away with every passing hour. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, scavenging what little she could find before the snow choked off all access. Hunger was a constant, gnawing pain in her belly, but it was nothing compared to the agony of watching her pups grow weaker, their tiny bodies shivering uncontrollably despite her efforts. The world outside her icy sanctuary was a blur of white, indistinguishable from sky or ground. Trees became ghostly silhouettes, their branches groaning under the weight of the snow. The air itself was a weapon, filled with stinging ice crystals that cut at her exposed nose and ears. She remembered, dimly, a life before this desolation, a warm place, a hand that stroked her fur, a bowl filled with food. But those memories were fleeting, ghost-like whispers against the roaring reality of the present. Abandoned months ago, in a remote area frequented by illegal dumping, she had fended for herself, her innate resilience keeping her alive. But motherhood, combined with this brutal storm, was a challenge beyond anything she had ever faced. One of the pups, the smallest, gave a faint, reedy cry, weaker than the others. Blizzard nudged it with her nose, a desperate whimper escaping her own throat. She tried to push it deeper into the warmth of her body, but her own warmth was rapidly fading. A terrible realization clawed at her. She was failing them. The thought was a physical blow, heavier than the cold, more crushing than the weight of the snow. A German shepherd's instinct was to protect, to serve, to survive. But against this relentless, indifferent force of nature, her instincts felt useless. She closed her eyes, trying to conserve every ounce of energy. The scent of pine and wet earth, usually comforting, was now merely a damp backdrop to the acrid smell of fear and desperation. She could feel the subtle shift in the pup's movements. Less squirming, more stillness. A horrifying premonition settled over her, a certainty that if no miracle arrived, by morning, they would all be nothing more than frozen statues, swallowed by the blizzard's relentless embrace. Meanwhile, miles away, in the relative warmth of his patrol car, Officer David Miller was nearing the end of his shift. The heater was blasting, but the cold still seemed to seep into his bones. The swirling snow reduced visibility to mere feet. turning the familiar rural roads into an endless, shifting white tunnel. David was tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that came from years of responding to the mundane and the heartbreaking in equal measure. 20 years on the force in this quiet, forgotten corner of Maine had taught him many things: how to distinguish a lost tourist from a runaway, how to mediate disputes between feuding neighbors, and, most importantly, how to steel himself against the endless parade of small-town sorrows. He'd seen a lot of abandonment in his time: old cars left to rust in forgotten fields, homes boarded up, families packing up and heading south in search of better lives. Sometimes it was animals, too, left behind when owners could no longer cope, or simply didn't care. It was the animal cases that always gnawed at him the most, the innocent victims. He'd rescued a few dogs, a couple of cats, even a bewildered goat once. He always made sure they found their way to the small, overstretched local animal shelter, managed by Sarah, a woman whose cynicism was a shield for a heart too often broken by the cruelty she witnessed. Tonight, however, seemed blessedly quiet, apart from the storm. The radio crackled only with weather updates and occasional reports of downed power lines. He was on his final loop through a particularly remote, wooded section of his patrol zone before heading back to the precinct. The snow here was even deeper, forming treacherous drifts that threatened to swallow his cruiser whole. He slowed down, his eyes scanning the blurred edges of the road, more out of habit than expectation. There was nothing out here but trees, snow, and the vast, indifferent wilderness. He was just about to turn onto the main highway when he heard it. A faint sound, almost swallowed by the roaring wind, a mere whisper against the blizzard's fury. It was a high-pitched, almost human-like whine, followed by a deeper, guttural murmur. David frowned, pressing a hand to his ear, trying to filter out the storm. It couldn't be. The wind played tricks, creating phantom noises. Especially on a night like this. He drove on for another 100 feet. But the sound, though faint, persisted. It was too distinct, too plaintive to be the wind. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, ran down his spine. Something was wrong, his years of experience. That quiet intuition that police officers learn to trust screamed at him to stop. This wasn't just the wind. This was a cry for help. He pulled the cruiser over to the side of the road, the tires crunching against the fresh, undisturbed snow. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence, broken only by the shriek of the blizzard, was deafening. He strained his ears, his breath fogging the air inside the car. There it was again, closer this time. Unmistakably a whine, followed by a faint, almost imperceptible whimper. Not one animal, but perhaps more. And definitely distressed. "Just my luck," he muttered. Reaching for his heavy-duty flashlight, he knew, with a sinking feeling, that whatever he found out there, it wouldn't be good. Nothing good ever happened in the middle of a blizzard, miles from anywhere, in the dead of night. But he also knew he couldn't just drive away. It wasn't in him. He grabbed his thickest gloves, pulled his hood tighter around his face, and stepped out of the warmth of his vehicle, into the heart of the raging storm. The cold immediately enveloped him, a tangible, suffocating weight. The snow, driven by the wind, lashed at his face, stinging his eyes. He flicked on his powerful flashlight, its beam a weak yellow spear against the blinding white. He followed the sound, stepping gingerly, sinking deep into the fresh powder with every step, his boots filling with ice. Each breath was a painful inhalation of frozen air. He didn't know what he would find, but a grim determination set his jaw. Whatever it was, it needed his help. And he was the only one out here. The bitter cold was a living entity, clawing at Officer David Miller's exposed skin as he trudged through the deepening snow. His flashlight beam, a solitary beacon in the swirling white, cut through the darkness, illuminating a treacherous path. He estimated he'd walked a quarter-mile from his cruiser, each step a battle against the drifts that threatened to swallow his boots. The whines, though still faint, were undeniably closer now, laced with a new urgency that tightened a knot in his stomach. It wasn't just a stray animal, it sounded like something truly desperate, truly in peril. He pushed aside a low-hanging, snow-laden branch, and the beam of his flashlight caught something dark against the pristine white. A small, almost imperceptible depression in the snow, nestled beneath the gnarled roots of a massive pine tree. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. This was an isolated area, notorious for illegal hunting and, occasionally, the dumping of unwanted refuse. His mind, trained for the worst, briefly conjured images of abandoned traps or even something far more sinister. But what he saw next banished all other thoughts, replacing them with a wave of profound sorrow and a fierce surge of determination. Curled into a tight ball, her body heaving with desperate shivers, was a German shepherd, her eyes, wide and luminous with a mixture of fear and defiance, reflected the flashlight's beam. And then, he saw them, nestled against her belly, barely visible beneath a thin dusting of snow in her protective body, were tiny, fragile lumps. Pups. Newborns, by the looks of them. Their forms so impossibly small and vulnerable against the vast, unforgiving expanse of winter. "Oh, you poor things," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. The mother dog, Blizzard, let out a low guttural growl, a warning deep in her chest. She shifted, subtly trying to shield her litter even further. Her teeth bared just enough to show she meant business. Her body language screamed fear in a primal, unyielding protectiveness. David slowly lowered himself to one knee. Keeping a respectful distance, he killed the intense beam of his flashlight, opting for a softer glow that wouldn't blind her. "Hey there, girl," he said, his voice soft, calm and reassuring. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." He reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, pulling out a protein bar he always kept for emergencies. He unwrapped it, the crinkling sound loud in the quiet of the storm. He broke off a small piece and gently tossed it a few feet from her. Blizzard watched it warily, her nose twitching. The scent of food an undeniable lure. Hunger warred with her suspicion. Finally, after a tense moment, she lunged forward, snatching the piece of bar and devouring it in a single gulp. "Good girl," David praised, offering another piece. This time, she took it a little less hesitantly. He continued this ritual, slowly closing the distance, speaking to her in a low, soothing tone. "You're freezing, aren't you, and your babies? They won't last much longer out here." He noticed the shallow depression she'd dug, barely enough to keep the wind off. Her paws were raw, her coat matted with frozen burrs and ice. She was gaunt, every rib visible beneath her fur. It was clear she hadn't eaten properly in weeks, possibly months. And the pups, they were barely moving, tiny tremors running through their bodies. One, smaller than the rest, wasn't moving at all. David's heart ached. He knew he had to act fast. "All right, girl," he said, deciding on a direct but gentle approach. "We've got to get you out of here. All of you." He moved slowly, deliberately, towards her, extending an open, empty hand. Blizzard tensed, her growl rumbling again, but this time, it was laced with exhaustion, not just aggression. She seemed to understand, on some deep, primal level, that this human was different. He wasn't a threat. He was offering something she desperately needed: warmth, safety, salvation. He knelt beside her, enduring the low growls and the occasional bared tooth. He spoke softly, continuously, explaining his intentions as if she could understand every word. I'm going to pick them up. Okay, gently. We'll get them into the car. Where it's warm, with agonizing slowness, he reached for the first pup. Blizzard's growl intensified, but she didn't snap. Her eyes, fixed on his hand, were filled with a terrible conflict, the instinct to protect, warring with the desperate hope that this human might be their last chance. David scooped up one of the smallest pups. It was shockingly light, its tiny body rigid with cold, barely breathing. He tucked it carefully inside his coat, against his own body, hoping to transfer some warmth. He repeated the process, one by one. Each pup was colder than the last, and the last one he picked up. The smallest one he'd seen earlier felt like a miniature block of ice. He knew, with a heavy heart, that it was likely already gone, but he couldn't leave it. He placed the 4 living pups carefully inside his jacket, then looked at Blizzard. Now you, girl, he said. He extended his hand, and this time, instead of growling, she nudged her head against it, a desperate, almost pleading gesture. He scratched gently behind her ears, feeling the sharp points of her hip bones beneath his fingers. He could tell she was moments from collapse. He then tried to gently guide her out from under the roots. She struggled to her feet, swaying precariously, her legs stiff from the cold and exhaustion. Her tail, which he hadn't seen move an inch, gave a single, weak thump against the snow. It was a tiny gesture, but to David, it spoke volumes. It was a sign of trust, a glimmer of hope amidst the despair. Slowly, carefully, he led her back through the swirling snow, towards the faint glow of his cruiser's headlights. The journey felt endless, each step an eternity. He worried about the pups in his coat, worried about Blizzard's failing strength. The Blizzard showed no signs of letting up, its icy grip tightening with every passing minute. Finally, they reached the car. He opened the back door, gently ushering Blizzard inside. She hesitated, her eyes darting between the confined space and the howling wilderness. But the warmth emanating from the car was an irresistible lure. With a final, weary sigh, she climbed in, collapsing onto the back seat. Her gaze fixed on David as he carefully placed the pups on the floor, wrapped in an old blanket he kept for emergencies. He then took out the smallest pup, just as he suspected. It was gone. He knelt for a moment, head bowed, a silent apology to the tiny life that had fought so bravely. It was a grim reminder of the stakes. He quickly got into the driver's seat, blasting the heat. Blizzard watched him, her eyes still wary, but no longer hostile. She seemed to understand they were safe. For now. David pulled out his phone, his fingers stiff with cold as he dialed the animal shelter. "Sarah, it's David Miller," he said. His voice strained. "I've got a situation. German shepherd and 4 pups, newborns, found them freezing in the snow, way out on Old Mill Road." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a weary sigh. "David, you know we're full. And it's the middle of a blizzard. We barely have enough space for the ones we've got." Sarah's voice was always pragmatic, always teetering on the edge of exasperation. But David knew it was born of constant struggle, not indifference. "I know, Sarah, believe me, I know," he pleaded, glancing in the rearview mirror at the trembling mother and her still. "Small bundles. But they'll die out here. They're barely alive as it is, especially the pups. This isn't a case of just full. This is an emergency. They need immediate warmth, food, everything. I'm bringing them in. Just make room. Please." Another long pause. David could almost hear her mental calculations. The weighing of impossible choices. Finally, her voice softened, tinged with grudging acceptance. All right, David, bring them, but I'm warning you. Resources are stretched thin. You'll owe me big time. Understood, David said, a wave of relief washing over him. I'm on my way. He hung up, put the car in drive, and slowly, carefully, began the treacherous journey back to town. The blizzard continued to rage, but inside the cruiser, a small, fragile pocket of warmth and hope had been created. Blizzard, sensing the shift, slowly relaxed, her large eyes fixed on the man who had, against all odds, offered them a chance. The kindness of a single officer, on a desolate road, in the heart of a brutal winter, had indeed changed everything. But their ordeal was far from over. The drive to the shelter was a tense, silent affair. David focused on the treacherous road, the cruiser's tires fighting for grip on the snow-slicked asphalt. In the back, Blizzard remained curled on the seat, her eyes occasionally flicking up to meet his in the rearview mirror. He could feel the fragile warmth radiating from the pups nestled in the old blanket on the floor. A tiny flicker of life he was desperate to preserve. He talked to them softly occasionally, simple words of reassurance. Almost there, girl. Almost there. He pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of the Northern Woods Animal Shelter, the headlights illuminating a small, unassuming building that looked barely able to withstand the assault of the storm. The sign, half covered in snow, read, Northern Woods Animal Shelter, where every paw finds a path home. A path that, for many, was tragically cut short. David killed the engine, and the immediate silence was filled with the rhythmic thump of the blizzard against the car and the frantic, soft whines of the pups. Blizzard stirred, her head lifting, a low rumble in her chest as if sensing the impending change. He got out, the cold instantly biting at him, and hurried to the back door. He opened it gently, and Blizzard slowly, cautiously, emerged, her gaze sweeping the unfamiliar surroundings, the scent of other animals, of disinfectant, and of a strange, contained warmth filled the air. He led her towards the entrance, the pup still clutched close to his chest. The shelter's interior was stark but clean, smelling faintly of antiseptic and damp fur. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow on rows of kennels, most of them occupied by dogs of various breeds, some barking, others watching with quiet resignation. Sarah, the shelter manager, stood by the reception desk, her arms crossed, a wary expression on her face. Her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her eyes, though tired, held an intelligent, assessing glint. She was in her late 40s, perhaps, with a lean build and hands that looked strong and capable. "David," she greeted, her voice flat, but her gaze immediately fell to the bundle in his arms. Her expression softened, a flicker of genuine concern replacing her usual guardedness. "Oh my God, you weren't kidding." David carefully placed the blanket-wrapped pups onto the reception counter, where a clean towel had been laid out. Blizzard, sensing her pup's proximity, immediately pressed herself against the counter, her nose nudging the fabric. "They're barely alive." "Sarah," David said, his voice quiet. "And the mother, she's exhausted, malnourished. Looks like she's been out there a long time." Sarah knelt, gently pulling back a corner of the blanket. A collective gasp escaped her lips. Newborns, and so cold. She touched one tiny, shivering body with a practiced finger. "We need to get them warmed up, now, and get some colostrum into them. Quickly, if we have any," she gestured towards the back. "Bring the mother to Isolation Bay 3. It's the warmest one we've got. And get her some water. Then the high-calorie wet food from the storage closet. Take off that thick coat. David, you'll be cooking in there." David nodded, grateful for her immediate, decisive action. He carefully guided Blizzard to the designated bay, A small, clean room with a heated floor and a sturdy, comfortable dog bed. Blizzard, exhausted, collapsed onto the bed, her eyes still fixed on the pups being carried away by Sarah. A soft whimper escaped her. "She'll be okay," David murmured, stroking her head. "They'll be okay. Sarah's the best." He spent the next hour helping Sarah, his uniform shed, working in a simple t-shirt. The pups were rushed to a heated incubator. Sarah, with calm efficiency, prepared small bottles of a nutrient-rich formula, gently coaxing the tiniest droplets into the mouths of the 4 shivering pups. One by one, their tiny bodies began to relax, their whimpers growing slightly stronger as the warmth seeped into their bones. David watched, mesmerized by Sarah's skill and dedication. She was a whirlwind of focused energy, her movements precise, her voice soft and encouraging to the fragile creatures, while Sarah nursed the pups. David brought Blizzard a large bowl of water, which she lapped up greedily, then a bowl of high-quality wet food. She devoured it in seconds, her hunger a desperate, primal force. As she ate, David noticed the scars on her body, faint, old marks, some on her legs, others on her flank. They looked like old wounds, not from accidental scrapes, but something more deliberate. And then he saw it around her neck, where a collar would sit. The fur was matted and thinner, almost rubbed raw in places. But no collar was present. "She looks like she's been through a lot." David commented to Sarah, who had just emerged from the incubator room, a tired but triumphant smile on her face. "The pups are responding well. Still very weak, but there's hope." Sarah looked at Blizzard, her gaze hardening slightly as she noticed the same scars David had. "Definitely. These aren't just stray dog marks. David, looks like she's been tethered for long periods. Maybe neglected? And those other marks? They could be anything. She's got survivor written all over her." "She was so protective," David recalled, remembering her fierce growl. "Wouldn't let me near the pups at first. Classic protective mother." Sarah agreed, then paused, her brow furrowing. But also, the way she was abandoned, and the breed. German shepherds are sought after. Why dump a purebred, especially one capable of having a litter? It was a question that would linger, a seed of suspicion that began to sprout in David's mind. For now, however, the immediate crisis was over. The animals were safe, warm, and fed. David stayed at the shelter long after his shift ended. Unable to tear himself away, he sat by Blizzard's kennel, just talking to her in low tones, letting her sniff his hand, occasionally giving her a gentle scratch behind the ears. Her tension slowly melted away, replaced by a wary acceptance, by the time he finally left. Well after midnight, Blizzard was asleep, curled up, her breathing even. A picture of exhausted peace. The pups, too, were quiet in their incubator, their tiny chests rising and falling with faint, rhythmic breaths. The next morning, David woke up feeling a profound sense of purpose. The rescue had shaken him, pulled him out of the weary routine he'd fallen into. He usually just clocked in, did his job, and clocked out. But Blizzard and her pups, they were different. They had touched something deep within him, reignited a spark of compassion that had dimmed over the years. He arrived at the shelter on his way to work, even before his shift started. Sarah was already there, bustling about, but her face held a new, cautious optimism. "Morning, Officer Miller," she greeted, a slight smile playing on her lips. "Good news. All 4 pups made it through the night. They're still fragile, but they're strong little fighters." "That's incredible," David said. Relief washing over him, he felt an inexplicable surge of pride, as if he himself had personally willed them to survive. He went to the incubator, peering through the clear plastic. The pups were tiny, no bigger than his hand. But they were moving, occasionally stretching, and even letting out faint, hungry squeaks. Their eyes were still closed, but their tiny noses twitched. "What about Blizzard?" he asked. "She's doing remarkably well," Sarah replied, leading him to Isolation Bay 3. Blizzard, upon seeing David, pushed herself up from her bed, her tail giving a tentative, almost imperceptible wag. She didn't growl, instead. She stretched out her nose, sniffing his outstretched hand, then licked it once. Softly. It was a gesture of profound gratitude. David spent a few minutes with her, scratching her behind the ears, talking to her. He could feel the connection forming, a silent understanding passing between them. He realized he was becoming emotionally invested, more than he usually allowed himself to be with the animals he rescued. This wasn't just a duty anymore. "I need to run a few checks," David said. Turning to Sarah, "See if she's microchipped, and I want to check local lost pet reports, missing dog notices. She's a purebred, expensive dog. Someone might be looking for her." He knew deep down that she was likely abandoned, but he had to exhaust all possibilities. Sarah nodded. "I already scanned her for a chip. No luck. But a report check is a good idea. I'll get you the forms. Maybe we can find out who did this to her." There was a steel in her voice now, a shared purpose that resonated with David, as David prepared to leave for his shift. He looked back at Blizzard, who was watching him with intelligent, patient eyes. Her ordeal was far from over, but the immediate threat had passed. Now, a different kind of journey began, a journey not just for her recovery, but for the truth behind her abandonment. And David, unexpectedly, found himself ready to embark on it, even if it meant digging deeper into the hidden cruelties of his quiet, snow-covered community. Officer David Miller's workday began with a stark shift from the raw emotion of the shelter to the mundane realities of police work. He spent the morning responding to a fender bender on a slick patch of highway and mediating a minor dispute over a snowplowing contract. Yet, even as he filed reports and listened to complaints, his mind kept drifting back to Blizzard and her pups. The image of their fragile forms, the mother's desperate eyes, was seared into his memory. During his lunch break, David dedicated himself to the unofficial investigation. He returned to the precinct and buried himself in the computer system. He started by searching missing dog reports within a 100-mile radius. Focusing on German shepherds, he filtered by sex, age approximation, and any distinguishing marks that might match Blizzard's faint scars or the peculiar thinness around her neck where a collar once sat. Hours passed in a blur of scrolling through databases, each found dog profile an image of hope or despair. Most were quickly reunited with their families, others remained mysteries. Their stories unresolved. He found nothing. No missing German Shepherd report matched Blizzard's description. Not even close. It confirmed his gut feeling she hadn't simply gotten lost. She had been abandoned. The realization hardened his resolve. Someone had deliberately left a pregnant dog to die in the brutal wilderness. That wasn't just neglect. It was an act of profound cruelty. Next, he expanded his search to include animal cruelty complaints and reports of suspicious animal activity in the more remote areas of the county. Particularly around Old Mill Road where he found Blizzard. He knew these records were often vague, sometimes based on hearsay, but they could provide a crucial thread. He cross-referenced names, addresses, and even vehicle descriptions from the occasional tips that had come in over the years. His search led him down a rabbit hole of minor infractions, unregistered kennels, nuisance barking complaints, and a few disturbing but unsubstantiated reports of animal hoarding. Nothing concrete enough to connect directly to Blizzard. The cold cases were frustrating, often ending with no resolution, just lingering suspicions. as the afternoon wore on. David felt a familiar weariness creeping in, but it was different this time. It wasn't the dull fatigue of routine, it was the sharp ache of a mind grappling with injustice. He thought about the small, still pup he'd found, the one that hadn't made it. He pictured Blizzard, gaunt and terrified, yet still fiercely protecting her living pups. This wasn't just about finding an owner, it was about holding someone accountable. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He needed a fresh perspective. He decided to pay a visit to a local character, Old Man Hemlock. Nathaniel Hemlock Granger was a recluse who lived in a ramshackle cabin deep in the woods. Not far from where David found Blizzard. He was an eccentric, known for his encyclopedic knowledge of the local wilderness and its inhabitants, both human and animal. Some considered him a nuisance. Others dismissed him as a harmless old crank. David, however, knew Hemlock often saw things the rest of the town missed. He had a way of noticing subtle changes, strange vehicles, or unusual patterns in animal behavior. The drive to Hemlock's cabin was even more challenging than the previous night's rescue. The snowplows hadn't reached this far off the main road, and David had to engage the cruiser's four-wheel drive. Inching through virgin snowdrifts, the cabin appeared suddenly, a wisp of smoke curling from its chimney, a comforting sign of life in the desolate landscape. David knocked on the worn wooden door. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing Hemlock's weathered face. Framed by a wild tangle of gray hair and beard, his eyes, though rheumy with age, held a sharp, intelligent glint. He peered at David through wire-rimmed spectacles, a faded flannel shirt barely containing his thin frame. "Officer Miller," Hemlock rasped, his voice gravelly from years of solitude and cold air. "Didn't expect company in this weather. What brings the law to my humble abode?" "Good afternoon, Hemlock," David replied, stamping snow from his boots. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I need your help. I found something yesterday near Old Mill Road, and I was hoping you might have seen something unusual in that area recently." Hemlock's gaze sharpened. "Unusual? You say that whole area is unusual. People dump all sorts of things back there. Old refrigerators, tires, sometimes even dogs." His last words were spoken with a hint of bitterness. "Exactly," David said, nodding. "A German shepherd, a female, with newborn pups. She was freezing, almost gone. One of the pups didn't make it." Hemlock's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger in their depths. "Pregnant. You say in this weather the devils. What kind of monster?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I've heard tell of folks around here, buying up purebreds, breeding them hard, then just tossing them aside when they're no longer useful. Makes my stomach turn. Have you seen anyone? Any vehicles? Anything suspicious near Old Mill Road in the past few weeks?" Leading up to the storm, David pressed, knowing Hemlock's memory, though long-winded, was often remarkably accurate. Hemlock stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, yeah, a truck, black, older model, loud muffler. Been seeing it more often than usual, especially in the late afternoons. Heading towards that logging trail off Old Mill. Always seem to be in a hurry, too. Too fast for those old roads. Too fast for—" "Can you describe the driver?" David asked, leaning forward. This was the first solid lead. Never got a good look. Hemlock admitted. Tinted windows, mostly up, but he was a big fellow, beefy, and he had a dog in the back on a couple of occasions. A large dog. Looked like a shepherd or something similar. Not in a proper kennel, mind you, just tied down. Looked miserable. David felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. A black truck, a large dog in the back. Near the area where Blizzard was found, it was a strong connection. "Did you notice anything else about the truck?" Any decals, bumper stickers, anything that would identify it? Hemlock thought for a moment. Then his eyes lit up. Yeah, something on the back. A faded decal, kind of tacky. Said puppy power or something like that. Always thought it was a strange thing to put on a truck that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. Puppy power, David repeated, a cynical twist to his lips. The irony was sickening. This wasn't a lost dog owner. This was someone involved in something far more sinister than casual abandonment. Hemlock, this is incredibly helpful, thank you. Just hope you catch the bastard. Hemlock grumbled, his gaze fixed on the snow-laden trees. Animals deserve better. They always do. Back in his cruiser. David immediately radioed the description of the black truck with the puppy power decal and a loud muffler into dispatch. He requested a check of local vehicle registrations. Looking for owners in the area with similar trucks. He also asked for any past complaints or known associations with illegal puppy mills or suspicious breeding operations. He knew it wouldn't be easy. People involved in such activities were often secretive, operating on the fringes of the law, but Hemlock's information was specific enough to give him a tangible lead. The image of Blizzard, shivering and starving, mingled with the faint hopes for her pups, fueled his determination. This wasn't just a rescue anymore, this was a hunt for justice. The cold, impersonal logic of police work had been replaced by a fierce, personal resolve. He would find who did this, and he would ensure they faced consequences. The blizzard might have brought the initial tragedy, but it had also ignited a spark of retribution in Officer David Miller. The black truck with the puppy power decal became Officer David Miller's obsession. It was more than just a vehicle, it was a tangible link to the cruelty Blizzard and her pups had endured. He spent the rest of his shift, and every spare moment thereafter, relentlessly pursuing this lead. His initial search of vehicle registrations for a black truck with such a distinctive, if ridiculous, decal didn't yield an immediate match. Most owners, he knew, would be smart enough not to register a vehicle used for illegal activities under their own names. Or at least, not with such an obvious identifier. He broadened his search, cross-referencing known individuals with a history of minor animal-related offenses, excessive barking complaints, unsanitary conditions reported at rural properties, or even just general suspicion from neighbors about large numbers of dogs. He focused on properties off the beaten path, those secluded enough to operate without immediate scrutiny. This was tedious work, a deep dive into the often murky waters of local grievances and whispers. Meanwhile, news of the miraculous rescue spread quietly through the small town. People talked. A German shepherd, found freezing with her pups in the middle of the worst blizzard in years. Rescued by Officer Miller. It was the kind of heartwarming story that cut through the usual small-town gossip, offering a glimmer of hope in the harsh winter. Donations of blankets, old towels, and even bags of high-quality puppy food started arriving at the shelter. Unexpected acts of kindness prompted by the story. At the shelter, Blizzard was slowly regaining her strength. She ate with a controlled eagerness now, no longer devouring her food as if it were her last meal. Her ribs were still visible, but her eyes had lost their haunted look, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. Her bond with David grew stronger with each visit. She would greet him with a soft nuzzle, sometimes even a tentative lick. It was a small gesture, but for David, it spoke volumes of her capacity for forgiveness and trust. Despite everything she had endured, the pups, tiny bundles of fur, were thriving under Sarah's meticulous care, their squeaks turning into stronger yips, their movements becoming more coordinated. They were still blind and utterly dependent, but their survival was no longer a desperate hope. It was a burgeoning reality. She's a remarkable dog. David, Sarah said one afternoon, watching Blizzard gently clean one of her pups in the incubator. An act of pure, instinctual motherhood. her will to live, her fight for those pups. It's inspiring. She deserves justice, David replied, his voice low. He was holding one of the pups, a tiny, squirming ball of warmth against his palm. No animal should suffer like that. Any luck with the truck? Sarah asked, knowing his unofficial mission. David shook his head. Frustration etched on his face. Not yet. No direct hits on the license plate or that puppy power decal. It's likely a commercial vehicle. Or one intentionally camouflaged. Most people who do this kind of thing, they're not exactly advertising it. Sarah noted dryly. But they also tend to be creatures of habit. They stick to what they know, and they often slip up. Her words echoed David's own thoughts. He decided to shift his strategy. Instead of focusing solely on databases, he needed to put boots on the ground, literally. He would start patrolling the area around Old Mill Road more frequently, especially in the late afternoons. Just as Old Man Hemlock had suggested, he'd observe. Watch for anything out of place. Any vehicle that matched the description. It was a long shot. But sometimes, old-fashioned police work was the only way. The next few days were a blur of routine patrols interspersed with his personal stakeout. The blizzard had abated, leaving behind towering snowdrifts and icy roads. But the sky had cleared to a brilliant, biting blue. The landscape was beautiful, but its beauty held a stark reminder of the recent tragedy. On the third afternoon of his intensified patrols, as dusk began to cast long, blue shadows across the snow-covered pines, David was cruising slowly down a rarely used logging trail, a rough, unpaved path that branched off Old Mill Road. It was the exact area Hemlock had mentioned. His cruiser bounced over frozen ruts. The silence broken only by the crunch of his tires on the packed snow. Suddenly, ahead, in the fading light, he saw it, a dark shape, partially obscured by a stand of fir trees. He slowed down, his heart beginning to pound a little faster. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a black pickup truck. Older model, parked haphazardly off the trail, even from a distance. He could hear the distinctive, loud rumble of its muffler, echoing unnaturally in the quiet woods. He killed his headlights and engine, pulling his cruiser into a concealed spot behind a cluster of trees. He grabbed his binoculars and a tactical flashlight, then stealthily made his way closer on foot. Using the dense tree cover for concealment, the air was frigid, but David barely noticed. All his senses were honed, his focus absolute. As he got closer, he could make out the details. The truck was indeed black, showing signs of neglect, patches of rust, and a layer of mud and grime. And there, on the back tailgate, faded but unmistakable, was a decal puppy power, with a crude drawing of a bulldog. Hemlock had been right, this was it. He crouched behind a thick bush, observing the scene. The truck was empty, its doors closed, but the back bed was covered with a tarp. Crudely tied down, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears, a muffled yelp. Then another. It was dogs. David's jaw tightened. This wasn't just abandonment. This was clearly part of a larger, ongoing operation. He couldn't just rush in. He needed to be sure. To gather enough evidence to build a strong case, he pulled out his police radio, keeping his voice low, almost a whisper. Dispatch. This is Officer Miller. I'm requesting backup to my current location. Just off Old Mill Road, near the old logging trail. I've located the black pickup truck matching the description from the animal cruelty lead. Suspect activity involving multiple animals. Copy that. Officer Miller. Dispatch crackled back. Backup en route, ETA 10 minutes. Maintain cover and observe. 10 minutes felt like an eternity. David continued to watch the truck, the muffled sounds from within growing more distinct. He could now hear more than just yelps. There was a faint whimpering, and the distinct smell of unkempt animals. A sickly mix of damp fur and waste. He felt a surge of cold fury. These animals were suffering, just as the distant wail of sirens began to reach his ears. A figure emerged from the dense woods ahead of the truck. A large man, heavily built. Just as Hemlock had described. He was wearing a thick stained jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He moved with a heavy gait, carrying something in his arms, a small, whimpering bundle. David's breath caught in his throat. It was another dog, a small, shivering puppy, clearly in distress. The man approached the back of the truck. Fumbling with the tarp, it was clear what he was doing. He was about to dump another animal. David couldn't wait for backup. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene. This wasn't just evidence, this was a life. He burst from his cover, his voice echoing through the quiet woods. "Police hands where I can see them," the man startled, dropping the whimpering pup, which landed with a soft thump in the snow. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock and a flash of anger. He was indeed a beefy man, with a crude, unshaven face. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt or even resist. But then he saw David's uniform, the glint of his badge, and the unwavering determination in his eyes. He slowly raised his hands, the rage in his eyes tempered by a sudden, dawning fear. David quickly secured the scene, his gaze sweeping the surroundings for any other threats. He scooped up the trembling pup, its tiny body shivering violently against his hand. It was an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, but this time, he wasn't just rescuing an animal, he was confronting its tormentor. The storm might have brought Blizzard to her knees, but Officer Miller's kindness, now sharpened by a fierce sense of justice, was about to bring her abuser to his... The bitter wind whipped around Officer David Miller as he held the shivering pup, its tiny body barely a handful of fur and bone. His gaze was locked on the man standing before him, whose face had twisted from shock to a sneering defiance. This was Vernon Viper Thorne, a name David recognized from the periphery of local law enforcement known for petty theft, a few bar brawls, and persistent rumors of unsavory dealings. Though nothing solid enough had ever stuck. "What's the big deal, officer?" Thorne growled, attempting to project an air of nonchalance that barely masked his fear. "Just taking my dog for a walk." He gestured vaguely at the whimpering pup David held. "A walk?" David's voice was sharp, cutting through the bluster. "In the middle of nowhere, at dusk, during winter, and this pup, Mr. Thorne, looks like it's moments from freezing to death. Just like the German shepherd and her litter I found abandoned up the road a few days ago. Don't tell me that black truck isn't yours." He gestured towards the puppy power decal with his free hand. Thorne's eyes darted nervously to the truck, then back to David. His bravado began to crumble. "Look, I don't know nothing about any German shepherd, and this ain't my truck. Exactly. Just borrowed it from a buddy." It was a transparent lie, one David had heard 1,000 times. Just then, the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, piercing the quiet of the woods. 2 more patrol cruisers, their lights flashing, pulled up behind David's concealed vehicle. Officers Thompson and Chen emerged, their expressions grim, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Thorne's face went pale. The backup David had requested had arrived just in time. "Officer Miller, you okay?" Thompson asked, his eyes immediately assessing the scene, the black truck, Thorne, and the tiny, distressed pup in David's arms. "I'm fine, Officer Thompson," David replied, his voice calm and authoritative. "Mr. Thorne here was just about to abandon this pup, and I believe he can tell us a lot about the German shepherd and her litter found last week. He also has more animals in the back of that truck." Thorne opened his mouth to protest, but Officer Chen, with swift, practiced movements, was already moving to secure him. "You have the right to remain silent," Chen began, reciting the Miranda warning. Thorne slumped, his defiance replaced by a sullen resignation, while Chen cuffed Thorne. David carefully handed the shivering pup to Thompson. "Get this one to the shelter, please, immediately. Tell Sarah I'll be there as soon as I can. Thompson, a seasoned officer who understood the gravity of animal cruelty cases, nodded grimly and hurried back to his cruiser with the pup. David then turned his attention to the truck. He pulled back the tarp covering the bed, and a wave of putrid smell assaulted his nostrils, a sickening mix of ammonia, fear, and unwashed animal. His stomach churned. Inside, crammed into small, dirty cages, were 3 more puppies, slightly older than the one he'd just rescued, perhaps 8-10 weeks old. They were thin, their fur dull, their eyes wide and terrified. Their whimpers were weak, their movements sluggish. "Oh, you poor things," David muttered, his heart aching. The sight solidified his resolve. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a backyard breeding operation. Or worse, a puppy mill in miniature. And the mother German shepherd. Blizzard was likely a discarded breeding dog, used until she was no longer profitable, then thrown away like trash. He secured the cages, ensuring the pups were as protected from the elements as possible. Before beginning a more thorough search of the truck, underneath some old blankets, he found more damning evidence: empty bags of cheap, low-quality dog food, some soiled rags, and, crucially, a tattered breeding record book. It was crudely kept, but listed dates, approximate litter sizes, and the names of various dog breeds, but mostly popular. Large breeds like German Shepherds, Labradors, and Rottweilers. One entry, dated approximately 3 months prior, simply read Blizz GSD, 5 pups. The name Blizz sent a cold shiver down David's spine. It was too close to Blizzard to be a coincidence. This was it. Irrefutable proof. He's been running a backyard breeding operation out here, David informed Thompson, who had returned after dispatching the pup with Chen. Looks like he was just dumping the ones that weren't selling, or the mothers when they were worn out. Thompson shook his head, a disgusted look on his face. Animals. Some people have no soul. They called for a tow truck to impound Thorne's vehicle and an animal control officer to safely transport the remaining pups. David made sure to meticulously document everything: photographs of the truck, the breeding records, the condition of the pups, and the general state of neglect. Every detail would be crucial in building a case against Thorne. Back at the precinct, Thorne was interrogated. He initially maintained his denials, but when confronted with the breeding records and the discovery of the Puppy Power decal, his story began to unravel. He admitted to owning Blizzard, whom he called Blizz. He confessed to breeding her repeatedly. Along with other dogs, he claimed he'd let her go when she seemed too tired to produce another litter and had become too expensive to feed. His casual dismissal of her life and suffering ignited a cold rage in David. Thorne showed no remorse, only a self-serving resentment at being caught. He was charged with animal cruelty, neglect, and operating an unlicensed breeding facility, while the charges might not seem severe to an outsider. David knew that the publicity, combined with the evidence, would make it a strong case. Later that evening, David arrived at the shelter, the taste of stale coffee in his mouth and the weight of the day's events heavy on his shoulders. Sarah met him at the door, her eyes immediately searching his. "The pup you sent." "David," she began, her voice soft. "He's in critical condition, but he's warm now. The other 3 from the truck just arrived. They're in rough shape, too." She paused, then asked, "You got him, didn't you?" David nodded, his jaw tight. Vernon Thorne. He admitted to owning Blizzard. Called her Blizz, used her for breeding, then dumped her. Found his breeding records in the truck. A wave of emotion crossed Sarah's face. A mix of relief, anger, and profound sadness. That monster, I knew it. These cases, they always break my heart. She looked at him. "Thank you, David, for not giving up, for going that extra mile." David felt a quiet satisfaction. The words were a balm to the exhaustion he felt. He went to Blizzard's isolation bay. She immediately trotted to the front of her kennel, her tail wagging tentatively. David knelt, stroking her head, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingers. "We got him, girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We got the man who hurt you." Blizzard licked his hand, a gentle, grateful gesture. It was as if she understood, on some deeper level, that a chapter of her suffering had closed. Her eyes, no longer haunted, seemed to reflect a newfound peace. She had been used, abused, and discarded, but through the kindness of a single officer, a chance encounter in the heart of a blizzard, justice was finally being served. The road to recovery for Blizzard and her pups was still long, but the journey towards accountability for her abuser had begun. David knew that this was just the beginning, but it was a crucial, powerful first step. The days following Vernon Thorne's arrest brought a fragile sense of calm to Officer David Miller. The blizzard had finally broken, retreating to reveal a landscape blanketed in dazzling, almost blinding white, reflecting the sun's harsh glare. But the cold remained, a biting reminder of the ordeal Blizzard and her pups had endured. David's routine at the precinct still involved fender benders and neighborhood squabbles. But now, every interaction felt infused with a deeper purpose. He found himself thinking about justice not just in terms of legal precedents, but in terms of silent victims. His evenings, however, were entirely devoted to the shelter. He made it a point to visit Blizzard and her pups daily, sometimes twice a day. The shelter, once a place he visited out of duty, had become a haven, a quiet sanctuary where he could witness the tangible results of his actions. Blizzard's transformation was profound. The gaunt, terrified dog he'd pulled from the snow was slowly, steadily, blossoming into her true self. Her fur, no longer matted with ice and grime, was beginning to regain its lustrous black and tan sheen. She was still thin, but the skeletal sharp edges of her frame were softening, replaced by the subtle curve of muscle and healthy weight. More remarkably, her spirit was mending. The constant wary tension in her body had eased. She no longer flinched at sudden movements, and her eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a deep, intelligent curiosity when David arrived. She would greet him with a soft whine, her tail giving a full, happy wag, not the tentative thump from that desperate night. She would lean into his touch, reveling in the gentle scratches behind her ears, and sometimes she would even press her head against his leg, a silent testament to the trust she now placed in him. The pups, too, were thriving under the meticulous care of Sarah, the shelter manager, and her dedicated but small team of volunteers. They had named them Snowy, Frosty, Blizzard Jr., and Winter. The tiniest one, the one David had initially thought wouldn't make it, was named Snowy. And against all odds, she was proving to be the most resilient of them all. A tiny fighter with an insatiable appetite. Their eyes had opened, revealing bright, curious blue or brown pools that reflected their growing awareness of the world. Their clumsy crawls had turned into wobbly walks, and their soft whimpers into playful yips and growls as they tumbled over each other in the warmth of their incubator. David spent hours simply watching them, sometimes helping Sarah with feedings, or just sitting beside Blizzard's kennel, observing the gentle, loving way she interacted with her growing babies. He saw the instinctive, fierce love in her eyes as she nuzzled them, cleaned them, and watched over their every breath. It was a stark contrast to the cold, calculating way Thorne had used her, a testament to the purity of an animal's bond. During one of his visits, Sarah brought up the matter of Blizzard's past. "You know, David," she said, watching Blizzard contentedly nurse her pups. "We still don't have a clear picture of her original life before Thorne. Those scars, the thinness of her fur around the neck, it indicates long-term neglect. Not just the recent abandonment, David nodded. Thorne admitted he'd had her for a while. Used her for breeding, but he didn't say where he got her. Just from a guy who had too many dogs. Typical. Right, Sarah mused. But her demeanor, her intelligence, she's clearly been socialized at some point. Maybe even trained. She doesn't have the wildness of a feral dog, and that thin patch around her neck. It's almost like a permanent indentation. Something was around her neck for a very long time. Rubbing the fur away, the conversation sparked a new line of thought for David. He knew that dogfighting rings often used larger, powerful breeds as bait dogs or as fighters. While Blizzard's gentle nature didn't scream, fighter, her scars and the way she'd been discarded suggested she might have been part of something equally cruel. Perhaps a large-scale, unregulated breeding operation, a puppy mill, where dogs were kept in deplorable conditions, chained or confined for life. He decided to revisit the raw data from his initial searches. This time, instead of focusing on lost dogs or local cruelty complaints, he would look for reports related to large numbers of dogs on a property, excessive barking complaints in isolated areas, or even complaints about suspicious transactions involving puppies in the region. He'd also look for any reports related to dogs escaping or being found from such properties. His investigation was purely unofficial, conducted during his personal time. But he was driven by an unshakable sense of duty to Blizzard. He spent hours in front of his home computer, cross-referencing old police reports, public animal control records, which were often sparse, and even local online forums where people discussed neighborhood issues. The lead came from an unexpected place, an old forum post from 2 years prior. A heated discussion about a property on the outskirts of the next county over. About 50 miles away. The post, from an anonymous user, complained about the horrible barking and sickly-looking dogs seen at a specific address, claiming it was a puppy farm and that the owner just chains them up and lets them freeze. The thread had quickly devolved into arguments and accusations, with no clear resolution or official intervention mentioned. The property owner mentioned in the thread was a man named Silas Blackwood. David felt a jolt of intuition. The address was remote, fitting the pattern. The description of the dogs and the alleged conditions resonated with what he imagined Blizzard's previous life might have been. And the timing, 2 years ago, suggested that this operation might have been ongoing for a while, perhaps even supplying dogs to smaller-scale breeders like Thorne. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead that made sense of Blizzard's deeper scars and her initial extreme fear. He drove to the next county on his next day off, a Sunday, opting to use his personal vehicle to avoid drawing official attention to an unofficial inquiry. The drive took him through winding, unpaved roads, deeper into the snow-covered wilderness. The address from the forum led him to a dilapidated farm, its fences collapsing, its barns leaning precariously. A thin, sickly dog, chained to a rusted barrel, barked weakly as David approached. Its ribs visible beneath its sparse fur. A chill, far colder than the winter air, seeped into David's bones. This was worse than he imagined. The place reeked of neglect and despair. He didn't see anyone around, but he could hear the faint, mournful whimpers of other dogs emanating from what looked like an old chicken coop behind the main barn. He walked cautiously around the property, his heart heavy. He documented what he saw with his phone camera: more chained dogs, emaciated and shivering, living in appalling conditions, piles of waste, empty. Frozen water bowls? It was a textbook case of a large-scale, illegal breeding operation, a genuine puppy mill. And then he saw it accrued. Hand-painted sign nailed to a post near the main gate. It simply read, "Puppies for sale, all breeds." His blood ran cold. He hadn't just found Blizzard's past, he'd found the source, the root of the cruelty. He immediately called the local sheriff's department in that county, providing a detailed report of what he was witnessing. He stayed on the property, hidden until their units arrived, ensuring no evidence was disturbed and no animals could be moved. The sheriff's deputies, led by an older, stern-faced lieutenant, were clearly taken aback by the scale of the neglect. They immediately initiated a full investigation, obtaining a search warrant based on David's evidence and their own observations. Silas Blackwood, the property owner, was found hiding inside the farmhouse. He was a disheveled, aggressive man who initially denied everything, then claimed he was just helping out by taking in stray dogs. His story quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence. David stayed for hours, assisting the deputies, watching as animal control officers, called in from several surrounding towns, began the heartbreaking task of rescuing dozens of dogs, German shepherds, Labradors, Huskies, all breeds, all suffering from various stages of malnutrition, dehydration, and untreated illnesses. Many were severely matted, some missing fur from constant rubbing against their chains or cages, as he watched the terrified, sick animals being carefully loaded into rescue vehicles. David saw echoes of Blizzard everywhere, the fear in their eyes, the scars on their bodies, the resignation in their postures. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was where Blizzard had come from. This was her lingering shadow. She wasn't just abandoned, she was a survivor of a systematic cycle of abuse. Used and discarded. The discovery was a devastating blow, confirming his worst fears. But it also brought a fierce satisfaction. He had peeled back another layer of the truth. He had not only brought Vernon Thorne to justice, but had also uncovered a far larger, more horrific operation. The cruelty was vast, but so, too, was the reach of kindness. This discovery meant more animals would be saved, more abusers held accountable. And for Blizzard, it meant that her painful past was finally being exposed, paving the way for a future free from shadows. The aftermath of the raid on Silas Blackwood's puppy mill sent ripples far beyond the quiet rural towns of Maine. News crews, alerted by local media, descended on the site, their cameras capturing the heartbreaking images of emaciated dogs being rescued from squalor. The story quickly went viral, igniting outrage across social media and prompting a flood of donations and offers of assistance for the rescued animals. For Officer David Miller, the satisfaction of seeing justice begin to unfold was profound, yet it was tempered by the raw, visceral pain of witnessing such widespread suffering. He spent the next few days navigating the official channels, providing his detailed report to the sheriff's department in the neighboring county. His role, officially, was that of a witness and an initial reporting officer. As the jurisdiction lay elsewhere, however, his expertise and the compelling evidence he'd gathered proved invaluable. Silas Blackwood was formally charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty, operating an unlicensed breeding facility, and endangering animals. The sheer scale of the operation meant a complex legal battle lay ahead. But David knew they had a strong case, back at his own precinct, his fellow officers. Initially skeptical of his personal crusade, now regarded him with a new respect. Even the most jaded among them couldn't deny the impact of the puppy mill expose. The chief commendation, however, came from a silent nod of approval from his usually stoic superior. A gesture that spoke volumes at the Northern Woods Animal Shelter. The atmosphere was one of quiet triumph mixed with exhaustion. Sarah and her team were stretched thin, but their spirits were buoyed by the influx of public support. Donations poured in. Volunteers arrived to help with the overwhelming task of caring for the traumatized animals. And rescue organizations from across the state offered to take in some of the Blackwood dogs once they were healthy enough to travel. Blizzard, oblivious to the media frenzy, continued her slow, steady recovery. She remained in her isolated bay, protected from the chaos of the newly arrived rescues. Her pups were growing rapidly, their tiny eyes now fully open, their clumsy movements becoming more deliberate. They were starting to play. batting at each other with soft paws. Their little barks attempts at communication. David spent more time than ever at the shelter. He wasn't just checking on Blizzard and her pups, he was helping wherever he could. He cleaned kennels, folded laundry, and even spent hours just sitting quietly with some of the more timid rescued dogs from Blackwood's farm, offering a gentle hand and a calm presence. He found a peculiar solace in the mundane acts of care, a way to counteract the darkness he'd witnessed one afternoon as he was feeding Blizzard. Sarah came into the bay, a thoughtful expression on her face. "David," she began, "the DNA results for Blizzard came back. We sent samples from her and the pups to a lab for breed identification, mostly for adoption purposes. But there was something else." David looked up, his heart quickening. "What is it?" "She's a purebred working line German shepherd," Sarah explained, her voice serious. "High-quality genetics, built for strength, intelligence, and endurance. And her lineage thought it's quite distinct. The lab noted some unique genetic markers, indicating a very specific, almost rare, bloodline. They usually see these kinds of markers in dogs from very reputable, often high-end, breeders, or even specialized training facilities." David frowned. So, she wasn't just a random backyard dog. She came from somewhere legitimate and then ended up with Thorn. That's the puzzling part. Sarah agreed. A dog of her quality, with such a distinct lineage, wouldn't just be too tired and discarded by someone like Thorn. He wouldn't have known her true value beyond her ability to produce puppies. Someone else bred her, and perhaps sold her to him as a breeding dog. Or maybe she was stolen. Or she escaped. This new revelation added another layer of complexity to Blizzard's past. It wasn't just neglect, it was a perversion of her true potential. A working line German shepherd was born to be active, to learn, to serve, to be confined, neglected, and used purely for breeding was a profound betrayal of her very nature. David returned to his desk at the precinct. His mind racing, he now had two distinct lines of inquiry for Blizzard's past Silas Blackwood's puppy mill as the likely immediate source for Thorn. And now, this mysterious, high-quality lineage. He decided to focus on the latter first. He started researching high-end German shepherd breeders in the region, looking for any reports of missing dogs, or any breeders known to have issues with stolen animals or unscrupulous sales. He also looked for any known connections between such breeders and individuals like Thorn or Blackwood. This was a long shot, a needle in a haystack. But David was driven by the image of Blizzard's intelligent eyes, her resilience. He felt a deep desire to uncover her entire story, not just the part where he found her. He immersed himself in the niche world of purebred dog breeding. He learned about titled dogs, dogs with impressive pedigrees and achievements in various disciplines like obedience, protection, or search and rescue. He found online forums dedicated to German shepherd enthusiasts, filled with discussions about bloodlines, breeding practices, and sometimes warnings about disreputable individuals. Then, he found it. An older forum post from about 3 years ago on a regional German shepherd enthusiast board. It was a heartbroken plea from a woman named Eleanor Vance, a renowned breeder of working line German shepherds from a sprawling kennel property about 100 miles south. She was searching desperately for a young female named Nova, a promising dog from a highly valued litter, who had vanished mysteriously from her secured kennel one night. Nova had unique genetic markers, specifically mentioned in the post, that matched the description Sarah had provided. The post also detailed Nova's distinctive black and tan coat, her intelligence, and a small, almost invisible scar near her left ear. A detail David had vaguely noticed on Blizzard but hadn't registered as significant until now. A surge of adrenaline coursed through David. Nova. Blizzard. The timeline. The breed. The genetic markers. The subtle scar. It all fit. The Nova in the forum post was Blizzard. He immediately called Eleanor Vance, using his official police phone. It was late, but he couldn't wait. After a few rings, a tired but polite voice answered. "This is Eleanor Vance." The woman said, "Ms. Ice Vance. This is Officer David Miller from the Northern Woods Police Department." David began, his voice steady despite his excitement. "I apologize for calling so late, but I believe I have some information regarding your missing German Shepherd. Nova." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a shaky gasp. "Nova, you found her? After all this time?" The disbelief and raw emotion in her voice were palpable. "We believe so," David confirmed. Explaining the circumstances of Blizzard's rescue, the discovery of Thorn, the raid on Blackwood's property, and finally, the DNA results and the forum post. He spoke calmly, methodically, painting a picture of Blizzard's ordeal. Careful not to overwhelm her, Eleanor listened in stunned silence, punctuated by quiet sobs. "Oh my God," she whispered when he finished. "My poor Nova. I knew she was special. I never gave up hope. Not truly, but to hear what she went through and her pups. Are they all right? 4 of them are thriving. Miss Vance." David reassured her, a smile touching his lips. "They're beautiful. Strong little pups, just like their mother." "I want to see her," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to see my Nova. Can I come to the shelter tomorrow?" "Of course," David said. "I'll arrange it with the shelter manager. Sarah, she'll be expecting you." He hung up the phone, a profound sense of satisfaction settling over him. He had found Blizzard's true past, not just the recent horror, but the deeper narrative of her life. She wasn't just a nameless, abandoned stray. She was Nova, a dog of noble lineage, stolen and subjected to unimaginable cruelty, only to emerge as a testament to resilience. The final pieces of her story were falling into place, revealing a truth more dramatic and heartbreaking than he could have ever imagined. And now, a chance for a true reunion, a bridge between a tragic past and a hopeful future, was finally within reach. The morning sun, though still frigid, streamed through the windows of the Northern Woods Animal Shelter, casting long, hopeful shadows. Officer David Miller arrived early, a rare buzz of anticipation replacing his usual pre-shift calm. He had already spoken with Sarah, the shelter manager, who, despite her perpetual exhaustion, was visibly excited about the impending reunion. The entire shelter staff, having heard the incredible story, buzzed with a quiet energy, a collective sense of purpose reaching beyond their daily duties. David spent a few moments with Blizzard, stroking her soft fur, explaining in his quiet, reassuring voice that a special visitor was coming. Blizzard seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, her tail giving tentative wags, her intelligent eyes fixed on David's face. The pups, meanwhile, tumbled in their incubator, oblivious to the momentous occasion, their tiny lives a testament to resilience. Just before 10 o'clock, a sleek, dark SUV pulled into the shelter's parking lot. David stepped outside to greet the visitor. A woman emerged from the vehicle, her posture elegant despite the apparent strain of a long journey. She was in her late 50s, with striking silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind, intelligent eyes that held a hint of profound sorrow. This was Eleanor Vance, the renowned German Shepherd breeder. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice a little shaky as she extended a gloved hand. Her grip was firm, despite her obvious emotion. "Thank you for everything." "Ms. Vance," David replied, shaking her hand firmly. "It's an honor, and it's David. Please." He led her inside, directly to the isolated bay where Blizzard was housed. As they approached, A low, inquisitive whine emanated from the kennel. David paused, allowing Eleanor to step forward first. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. I saw one stifling a gasp. Blizzard, upon seeing the unfamiliar woman, rose slowly, her tail giving a tentative, almost imperceptible wag. She tilted her head, sniffing the air. Then her eyes widened slightly. There was a pause, a tense, silent beat, as if the past 2 years of trauma and neglect simply evaporated in that instant. Nova, Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with unshed tears. She took a hesitant step closer. My sweet Nova. At the sound of the name, Blizzard's entire demeanor transformed. Her ears perked up. Her tail began to wag with a joyous, frantic energy, thumping loudly against the kennel wall. A deep, rumbling whine, a sound of pure recognition and overwhelming joy, escaped her. She pressed herself against the wire mesh, her body trembling not from cold or fear, but from sheer, unadulterated happiness. Eleanor, tears now streaming down her face, knelt by the kennel, reaching out a trembling hand. Oh, Nova, she sobbed, burying her face in the dog's soft fur. Blizzard, or rather Nova, licked her hands, her face, her tears, with an intensity that spoke volumes. It was a reunion years in the making, a moment of profound emotional release. David and Sarah watched from a respectful distance, both deeply moved by the raw display of affection and recognition. The bond was undeniable, unbroken by time or trauma. It's her, David. Eleanor finally managed to choke out, looking up, her eyes shining through her tears. It's absolutely her. I would know her anywhere. Her eyes, her markings, even that little scar near her ear. Oh, Nova, my beautiful girl, after a long, emotional embrace. Eleanor pulled back, still stroking Nova's head. How did she end up like this? David, she asked. Her voice filled with a fresh wave of pain as she remembered Nova's ordeal. David gently recounted the story, starting from the discovery in the blizzard, the identification of Vernon Thorne, and finally, the raid on Silas Blackwood's puppy mill. He explained the likely sequence of events. Nova, stolen from Eleanor's kennel, likely sold to Blackwood, used as a breeding dog in the horrific conditions of his puppy mill. And then, when her usefulness was deemed over or she became too much of a burden, sold or traded to Thorne, who ultimately abandoned her to die in the snow. Eleanor listened, her face contorting with a mixture of grief and simmering rage. Blackwood! She spat the name, her voice low and venomous. I've heard whispers about that monster for years, but no one ever had enough to pin him down. And Thorne, how dare he? Justice is being served. Miss Vance? David assured her. Both Thorne and Blackwood are facing serious charges, and with Nova as a key piece of evidence. Their cases are even stronger. Eleanor then asked to see the pups. Sarah led her to the incubator, and Eleanor gasped again, this time with pure delight. They're magnificent, she breathed, peering at the squirming bundles of fur. They have Nova's strong bone structure, her coloring. Little Nova's, she carefully selected one of the pups, the one David had called Snowy, and gently held it. The tiny pup, still mostly blind, instinctively nuzzled into her hand, its tiny mouth searching for warmth. Eleanor's eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. But these were tears of joy. They're survivors, just like their mother. The discussion then turned to the future. Eleanor was firm. I want to take Nova and her pups home. David, they belong with me. They are part of my family, part of my legacy. We understand that. Miss Vance. Sarah said gently, but there are legal procedures. Nova is evidence in an ongoing criminal case, and the pups, they are technically the property of the state. Having been rescued from a cruelty situation, Eleanor nodded, her expression determined. I understand. I'm a reputable breeder. My kennel is licensed, inspected, and held to the highest standards of care. I have veterinary records for Nova dating back years. I will cooperate fully with any legal requirements. Provide any testimony needed. I just want them safe and home. David and Sarah explained the process. Nova would need to remain in the shelter's care until after Thorne's trial, though Eleanor would be granted extensive visitation rights. The pups, however, once weaned and healthy, could potentially be released to Eleanor's care earlier, given her established reputation and the urgency of providing them a stable, loving environment. They would require careful monitoring and regular updates to the court. Eleanor spent the rest of the day at the shelter, poring over Nova, showering her with affection, and talking softly to her. She also spent time with the pups, observing their unique personalities already beginning to emerge. She told David and Sarah stories about Nova's lineage, her intelligence as a young dog, her playful nature. It was clear that Nova was not just a breeding dog to Eleanor. She was a beloved companion, a testament to years of dedicated breeding and training. Before Eleanor left, she approached David, her hand resting gently on Nova's head. David, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. You saved her. You saved them all. You brought her back to me. How can I ever repay you, knowing she's safe, and that justice is being served? Is all the repayment I need. Mr. Vance? David replied, his gaze meeting hers. It was the right thing to do. No. Eleanor corrected him softly. It was more than the right thing. It was kindness, and it changed everything. Not just for Nova, but for me. And I suspect, she added, her eyes twinkling slightly, for you too. Officer Miller. David felt a warmth spread through him, a realization that resonated deeply. He had started this journey out of duty, then out of a growing sense of injustice. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more profound. It had rekindled his belief in the power of compassion, the enduring strength of the bond between humans and animals, and the quiet satisfaction of making a true difference. As Eleanor drove away, promising to return soon, David stayed with Nova, scratching behind her ears. The silent conversation between them was richer than any words could convey. The cold, bleak world had given way to the warmth of reunion, and a future, once unimaginable, now shone brightly on the horizon. The reunion of Nova and Eleanor Vance became a quiet legend within the shelter walls and among the local community that had followed the German Shepherd's incredible rescue. It wasn't just a heartwarming story, it was a testament to the enduring power of connection and the tenacity of life. For Officer David Miller. Witnessing that moment of recognition had been profoundly moving, solidifying his resolve to see justice fully served. The next few weeks were a period of intense activity, both for David and for the animal shelter. With Eleanor's testimony and Nova's established lineage, the cases against Vernon Thorne and Silas Blackwood gained significant momentum. Eleanor provided detailed records of Nova's pedigree, her veterinary history, and the security measures of her kennel from which Nova had been stolen. She also offered to testify about the devastating impact of such operations on reputable breeders and, more importantly, on the animals themselves. David worked closely with the district attorney's office, providing all the evidence. He had meticulously gathered photographs of Thorne's truck and the abandoned pups, the seized breeding records, his eyewitness account of Thorne's attempt to abandon the last pup, and the comprehensive report from the raid on Blackwood's puppy mill. The sheer volume and damning nature of the evidence made it increasingly difficult for the defense to argue against the cruelty charges. The local media, still captivated by the story, continued to run updates. The public outcry over the conditions at Blackwood's farm was immense, fueling a push for stricter animal welfare laws in the state. Donations to the shelter surged, allowing Sarah to expand resources, hire more staff, and provide specialized medical care for the most traumatized rescued dogs. It was a silver lining to a dark cloud, a demonstration of collective compassion. Nova, meanwhile, continued to flourish. The emotional reunion with Eleanor seemed to have unlocked a deeper layer of her personality. She became more playful, more vocal. Her tale a constant blur of motion when Eleanor visited. Eleanor, true to her word, made the 100-mile trip regularly, spending hours at the shelter, brushing Nova's coat, playing with her, and just sitting quietly, reconnecting. She also spent significant time with the pups, observing their development. She noted their individual traits, already starting to show the intelligence and spirit of their mother. The pups, now more active and curious, were a source of constant delight. They had graduated from the incubator to a large, heated playpen, their wobbly steps replaced by confident trots. Their eyes, once blue, were gradually shifting to the deep amber and brown characteristic of German shepherds. They wrestled, chased each other's tails, and emitted a chorus of happy barks and growls, transforming the quiet shelter into a bustling nursery. Sarah had started the process of finding them suitable, loving homes, carefully screening potential adopters to ensure they understood the commitment required for a working-line German shepherd. David, though still burdened by his duties, found genuine joy in these visits. He would often sit on the floor of Nova's bay, letting the pups crawl all over him, their tiny teeth gently nipping at his fingers. Nova would lie beside him, her head resting on his lap, a picture of contented trust. He had never considered himself a dog person before. Not truly, but Nova had changed that, breaking through a barrier he hadn't even realized existed. One crisp afternoon, a few weeks later, a letter arrived at the precinct for David. It was from the district attorney's office. The plea deal. Vernon Thorne, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of significant jail time, had agreed to plead guilty to animal cruelty and operating an unlicensed breeding facility. He would receive a substantial fine, a lengthy probation period with strict conditions, and, crucially, a lifetime ban on owning or possessing any animals. It wasn't the maximum sentence, but it was a clear victory, ensuring Thorne could never inflict such suffering again. The case against Silas Blackwood was more complex, requiring more time and evidence due to the larger scale of his operation and the additional charges of neglect and endangerment. However, the initial legal proceedings were already underway, and David knew Blackwood faced an even harsher fate. The wheels of justice, though slow, were turning for David. The end of Thorne's immediate legal battle brought a strange sense of closure. He had done his part. He had found the victims, identified the perpetrator, and helped bring him to justice. But the story wasn't quite over for him personally. One evening, as he was about to leave the shelter after his usual visit, Sarah stopped him. "David," she said, a gentle smile on her face. "You know Nova is officially cleared for adoption after Thorne's sentencing, even though she's still needed as evidence. And Eleanor, she's decided something." David's heart gave a little lurch. He knew Eleanor planned to take Nova home, and rightfully so. That was the natural, happy ending. He had accepted it. But still, a part of him felt a pang of unexpected sadness. He had grown so attached to Nova, to her quiet strength and her unwavering trust. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Eleanor is incredibly grateful for what you did," Sarah explained, her eyes twinkling knowingly. "She said you literally saved Nova's life, and therefore her legacy, and she's seen how attached you've become to her. She wants to offer you something. She wants to give you one of the pups. David stared at her, stunned. One of the pups, he repeated, a wave of disbelief washing over him. She's serious. Sarah nodded. Completely. She said it would be an honor for you to have one of Nova's babies. A direct link to the courage and resilience you both showed. A mix of emotions swirled within David. Joy, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He thought of the tiny, helpless forms he'd pulled from the snow. The quiet strength of Nova. To have one of them. A living testament to that rescue. A constant reminder of the profound impact he'd had. It was overwhelming. He thought of his quiet, empty house. He thought of the endless, solitary evenings. A puppy? A German Shepherd puppy. Intelligent and full of life. It would be a huge commitment. A massive change to his carefully structured routine. But the thought didn't fill him with dread. It filled him with a hopeful excitement he hadn't felt in years. Which one up, he asked, his voice a little hoarse. Sarah smiled. She left that up to you, but she did say that Snowy has developed quite a bond with you. She's the smallest, the fighter, and she watches you more than any of the others. David thought of Snowy. The tiny pup he'd initially feared was lost. The one who had clung to life with such surprising tenacity. She was indeed a fighter, a true survivor, and he had felt a special connection to her from the moment he'd brought her in from the snow. He went to the playpen. Kneeling down, the pups immediately swarmed him, yipping playfully. But Snowy, though smaller than her siblings, pushed her way to the front, clambering onto his lap, her tiny tail wagging furiously. She licked his chin, her blue-brown eyes fixed on his with an unmistakable adoration. He picked her up, holding her close. She was warm, solid, and utterly trusting. "Hello, little fighter," he whispered, a genuine, unburdened smile spreading across his face. "Looks like you're coming home with me." The decision was made, not with logical deliberation, but with the quiet certainty that comes from the heart. The blizzard had brought unimaginable hardship, but also a new beginning. It had introduced him to Nova, illuminated a dark corner of cruelty, and now it was bringing him a new companion, a symbol of hope and the enduring power of kindness. His life, once so steeped in routine and quiet weariness, was about to change. Forever, the transition of Snowy from the bustling, albeit loving, environment of the animal shelter to the quiet routine of Officer David Miller's home was surprisingly seamless. David had spent weeks preparing, outfitting his modest house with all the necessary puppy accoutrements, a soft bed in a cozy corner, an array of chew toys, and a supply of premium puppy food. He even moved his favorite armchair closer to the fireplace, anticipating countless evenings with a warm, furry companion. The day he brought Snowy home was bright and crisp, the air still carrying the bite of winter but with the promise of spring lingering on the horizon. Snowy, a tiny bundle of fluff and boundless energy, explored her new surroundings with an endearing mix of curiosity and cautious confidence. She sniffed every corner, investigated every piece of furniture, and finally, with a contented sigh, curled up on her new bed. A tiny, perfect form of contentment. David quickly discovered that life with a puppy was far from quiet. Snowy was a whirlwind of joyous energy. Her days were filled with playful nips at his shoelaces, clumsy attempts at fetching squeaky toys, and the inevitable, urgent need for potty breaks, often at the most inconvenient times. His meticulously organized mornings became a chaotic dance of feeding schedules, training attempts, and quick dashes outside, yet for every chewed slipper or puddle on the floor, there was a moment of pure, unadulterated puppy affection, a soft nuzzle against his hand, a happy yip of greeting, or the profound trust in her bright, intelligent eyes. He found himself talking to her constantly, explaining his day, praising her small victories, and gently correcting her puppy mischief. He rediscovered a sense of playfulness he hadn't realized he'd lost. His colleagues at the precinct noticed the change. The weary lines around his eyes seemed to soften, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile often played on his lips. He even started bringing up Snowy stories during coffee breaks, a stark contrast to his usual reserved demeanor. Meanwhile, at the shelter, Nova continued to thrive under Eleanor Vance's devoted care and the shelter staff's expertise. Her physical recovery was complete, her coat gleamed, and her body, once skeletal, was now lean and strong, a testament to her working line lineage. More importantly, her spirit had fully reawakened. She was playful, affectionate, and her innate intelligence shone through in every interaction. Eleanor visited almost daily, often bringing special treats and toys. She spent hours with Nova, gently reintroducing her to basic obedience commands, observing her keen instincts, and marveling at her remarkable resilience. Their bond, severed by cruelty, was now stronger than ever, rebuilt on a foundation of trust and unwavering love. The pups who remained at the shelter, Frosty, Blizzard Jr., and Winter, were growing into healthy, boisterous youngsters. Sarah had meticulously screened potential adopters, ensuring each pup would go to a loving, responsible home that understood the needs of a German Shepherd. It was a painstaking process, but Sarah was unyielding in her commitment to finding them perfect matches. The shelter's increased funding, thanks to the public outcry over Blackwood's case, allowed for a more rigorous adoption process and better post-adoption support. The legal proceedings against Silas Blackwood progressed slowly but steadily. The sheer number of animals rescued from his property, combined with the horrifying conditions documented, painted a grim picture for the prosecution. David was called to testify, detailing his initial discovery, the raid, and the overwhelming evidence of systemic cruelty. Eleanor also provided powerful testimony, speaking emotionally about the theft of Nova and the devastating impact of illegal breeding operations on reputable breeders and the integrity of the breed itself. Blackwood, unlike Thorn, remained defiant, his face a mask of bitter resentment. His legal team attempted to discredit witnesses and downplay the severity of the conditions, arguing that he was merely a collector of animals. But the evidence, including veterinary reports detailing severe neglect, malnutrition, and untreated illnesses among the rescued dogs, was irrefutable. The public, still engaged with the story, followed every twist and turn of the trial, eager for justice. The climax of the trial came with the presentation of Nova as evidence. Her very presence in the courtroom, calm and dignified beside a handler, was a powerful symbol. The prosecution introduced her DNA evidence, linking her directly to Eleanor, and then detailed her abandonment in the blizzard with her pups, connecting her back to Thorn, and then ultimately to Blackwood. The story, from a stolen, high-value breeding dog reduced to a discarded, freezing mother, resonated deeply with the jury. The jury returned a unanimous verdict guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase was swift and decisive. Silas Blackwood received a significant prison sentence, a substantial fine, and, like Thorn, a lifetime ban on owning or being involved with animals. The judge, in his closing remarks, spoke passionately about the gravity of animal cruelty, emphasizing that it would not be tolerated in their community. It was a resounding victory for animal welfare, sending a clear message to anyone who would exploit or abuse vulnerable creatures. For David, this verdict brought a profound sense of closure, far more impactful than Thorn's plea deal. Blackwood's operation was the root of so much suffering, and bringing him down felt like a true triumph of justice. He thought of Nova, safe and loved, and of Snowy, curled at his feet back home. Their rescue had sparked this larger revelation, and now, the cycle of abuse that had ensnared them had been broken. With the trial concluded, Nova was officially released from her evidence status. The day Eleanor took Nova home was a joyous occasion. David and Sarah were there, along with many of the shelter volunteers, to bid them a heartfelt farewell. Nova, now truly herself, bounded into Eleanor's waiting car, a picture of health and happiness. It was a bittersweet moment for David, but seeing Nova reunited with her true family, living the life she was meant to, filled him with immense satisfaction. The other pups also found their forever homes. Frosty went to a young couple who lived on a farm, promising her a life of open spaces and companionship. Blizzard Jr., the largest and most boisterous, was adopted by a family with 3 children, eager for a playful, energetic companion. Winter, the quietest and most observant, found a home with an elderly woman who longed for a loyal and intelligent companion. Each adoption was a testament to the resilience of these little fighters and the tireless work of Sarah and her team. David's life settled into a new, comforting rhythm with Snowy. His once quiet evenings were now filled with the gentle presence of his furry companion. He enrolled Snowy in puppy training classes, where she excelled, demonstrating the intelligence inherited from Nova. He learned patience, consistency, and the sheer joy of watching a dog thrive under proper care and boundless love. The once jaded Officer Miller was gone, replaced by a man whose heart had been profoundly touched. The rescue, the investigation, the court cases, they had all been catalysts for a deep personal transformation. He no longer viewed his job as merely a series of incidents. He saw the interconnectedness of lives, the potential for positive change, and the enduring power of compassion. The blizzard had been a turning point, ushering in not just a rescue, but a renewal, changing not just a dog's life, but his own. Life with Snowy was a masterclass in joy and a constant reminder of the profound interconnectedness of lives. Officer David Miller found himself waking each morning with a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. His once Spartan home, now filled with the gentle thud of a wagging tail, the soft sighs of a sleeping puppy, and the occasional squeak of a toy, felt truly lived in. Snowy, embodying the resilience of her mother. Nova, flourished under David's devoted care. She grew rapidly, her clumsy puppy paws transforming into powerful, elegant limbs, her fur deepening into the rich black and tan of her German Shepherd lineage. David, true to his word, enrolled Snowy in advanced obedience classes. He watched with immense pride as she quickly grasped commands, her intelligent eyes keenly focused on his every instruction. She inherited Nova's sharp mind and eagerness to please, making training a rewarding experience for both of them. They spent their off-duty hours exploring the now thawing Maine wilderness, Snowy bounding through the melting snowdrifts, her energy seemingly limitless. David found himself rediscovering the beauty of the outdoors, something he'd taken for granted for so long. He'd bring a thermos of coffee, and they'd sit on a fallen log, Snowy resting her head on his lap, simply enjoying the quiet peace of nature. His colleagues, initially amused by his newfound devotion to Snowy, now saw the deeper impact she had on him. Officer Thompson often joked about David's inner dog whisperer, while Officer Chen commented on how much more present David seemed to be, less withdrawn. Sarah, the shelter manager, would often call to check in, delighted by the updates on Snowy's progress. These conversations often evolved into deeper discussions about animal welfare, and David found himself becoming an unexpected advocate. Sharing his experiences and insights with renewed passion, the successful prosecution of Vernon Thorne and Silas Blackwood had a ripple effect throughout the community and beyond. The media attention surrounding the cases, particularly Blackwood's puppy mill, sparked widespread public discourse. Local politicians, spurred by voter outrage, began drafting stricter animal cruelty legislation, including harsher penalties for neglect and mandatory licensing for breeders. David was even invited to speak at a town hall meeting, sharing the harrowing details of Nova's rescue and the suffering he witnessed at Blackwood's farm. He spoke with a quiet intensity that captivated the audience, his words resonating with a newfound authority and compassion. The Northern Woods Animal Shelter, once struggling to make ends meet, was now thriving. Donations continued to pour in, allowing Sarah to not only expand their facilities but also establish a dedicated fund for investigating and prosecuting animal cruelty cases. They launched educational programs in local schools, teaching children about responsible pet ownership and the importance of empathy towards animals. David, seeing the profound, positive changes spurred by one act of kindness, felt a deep sense of validation. Months turned into a year. Snowy was no longer a pup, but a magnificent young German shepherd, a loyal and intelligent companion. Her bond with David was unshakable. She was a constant source of comfort and joy, a silent confidant who listened without judgment. Her presence in his life had filled a void he hadn't even known was there. His once solitary evenings were now spent with her curled at his feet, his hand gently stroking her soft fur as he read or watched TV. One crisp autumn afternoon, David received a call from Eleanor Vance. "David," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "Nova is doing splendidly. She's back to her old self, strong and happy. But I was wondering if you and Snowy would like to come visit. It's been too long, and I think Nova misses her baby." David agreed immediately. He knew it was time for Snowy to meet her mother, and for him to see Nova in her true element. The journey to Eleanor's sprawling kennel property, nestled amidst rolling hills painted in autumn hues, felt like a pilgrimage as they drove. David felt a nervous excitement build within him. How would Snowy react? Would Nova remember her tiny pup upon their arrival? The property was even more impressive than he had imagined. Impeccably maintained kennels, vast exercise yards, and the disciplined, joyful barks of healthy, well-cared-for German shepherds filled the air. Eleanor greeted them with a wide smile, her eyes shining with warmth. "Welcome, David." "Snowy," she said. Embracing David warmly, she immediately knelt to greet Snowy, who, despite her usual reserved nature with strangers, responded with a tentative sniff and a soft wag of her tail. "Nova's waiting," Eleanor said, leading them to a large grassy enclosure. As they approached, a majestic German shepherd, her coat gleaming in the sunlight, trotted confidently towards the fence. It was Nova. She was even more magnificent than David remembered, her eyes bright with intelligence, her posture regal. Nova immediately recognized David, nudging his hand with her nose, her tail giving a happy thud against the fence. Then, her gaze fell upon Snowy. Snowy, initially hesitant, took a step forward, her nose twitching. Taking in the familiar scent, Nova let out a low, soft whine, a sound of profound recognition and maternal love. She pressed her head against the fence, her eyes fixed on her daughter. David unclipped Snowy's leash. With a burst of energy, Snowy bounded towards Nova. The two dogs met at the fence line, noses touching, tails wagging in a frenzy of recognition and joy. It wasn't just a greeting, it was a deep, emotional reunion. Nova licked Snowy's face, nudged her, and then, with a playful bark, they began to run, chasing each other across the expanse of the yard. Two magnificent German shepherds, mother and daughter, reunited against all odds. David watched, tears blurring his vision. This was the true ending to the blizzard's tale. Not just justice for the perpetrators, but full restoration for the victims. He saw Nova, strong and free, living the life she was meant to. And he saw Snowy, a testament to resilience, a beacon of kindness, thriving by his side. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You see, David," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "What you did, it wasn't just a rescue. It was an act of pure kindness. And it changed everything. Not just for them, but for us. It reminded me what true dedication and compassion look like." David nodded, unable to speak, his gaze fixed on the two beautiful dogs. He thought back to that freezing night, the desperate whimpers, the image of a mother dog fighting against the inevitable. He thought of the skepticism he'd faced, the weariness that had once defined his life. And now, here he was, watching the embodiment of hope and recovery. The visit stretched into the afternoon. Eleanor showed David her state-of-the-art facility, explaining her ethical breeding practices, her dedication to the health and well-being of her dogs. He learned about the rigorous training Nova had undergone before her disappearance, her potential as a search and rescue dog, a path her cruel captivity had stolen from her. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the property, David and Snowy prepared to leave. Nova and Snowy shared a final, lingering nuzzle, a silent promise of future visits. Driving home, with Snowy sleeping soundly in the passenger seat, David felt a profound sense of peace. His life had been irrevocably altered by a mother dog and her pups freezing in the snow. Their story had not only brought a cruel breeder to justice, but had also opened his heart, brought him a beloved companion, and shown him the boundless power of a single act of kindness. He was no longer just Officer David Miller, the jaded patrolman. He was a man transformed, living a life rich with purpose and an unexpected, profound love. The seasons cycled through, each bringing new growth and deeper meaning to David Miller's transformed life. The brutal Maine winter had given way to a vibrant spring, then the lush greens of summer. And now, the fiery hues of autumn once again painted the landscape. Snowy was now a fully grown German shepherd, a magnificent testament to her lineage and to the loving care she had received. Her intelligence and unwavering loyalty shone in her every action. She was David's shadow, his confidant, and the vibrant pulse of his once solitary home. Their morning runs through the crisp autumn air became a ritual. Snowy would bound ahead, her powerful legs eating up the ground, her keen nose constantly sampling the scents of the forest. David, though no longer a young man, found himself invigorated by her boundless energy, pushing himself further than he ever thought possible. These quiet moments in nature, shared with his faithful companion, were a balm to his soul, a stark contrast to the relentless stress of his police work. David's commitment to animal welfare had deepened considerably since Nova's rescue. He found himself volunteering more frequently at the Northern Woods Animal Shelter, helping Sarah with everything from cleaning kennels to assisting with adoption events. He lent his voice to public awareness campaigns, sharing his story with quiet conviction. His once jaded view of humanity had been tempered by the overwhelming kindness he'd witnessed, the outpouring of donations, the flood of volunteers, the countless individuals who had opened their homes and hearts to the animals rescued from Silas Blackwood's horrific puppy mill. The Blackwood case, which had drawn national attention, continued to inspire change. Legislators, emboldened by public support, passed a landmark animal protection bill, tightening licensing requirements for breeders, increasing penalties for animal cruelty, and providing more resources for animal control agencies. It became known informally as Nova's Law in some circles, a lasting legacy of her suffering and subsequent rescue. David found a quiet pride in this, knowing that the ripple effect of his actions had touched countless lives, both human and animal. Snowy's siblings had also found their forever homes and were thriving. David often received updates from their new families. Frosty was a beloved farm dog, herding chickens with surprising gentleness. Blizzard Jr. was the rambunctious, adored companion of three children, filling their home with laughter, and Winter was a calm, intelligent presence, a solace to her elderly owner. The network of their new lives, all stemming from one act of kindness in a blizzard, was a source of profound joy for David. His visits to Eleanor Vance and Nova became a cherished tradition. Nova, fully recovered, was indeed back to her true self. Eleanor had resumed her advanced training, and Nova, with her incredible intelligence and drive, was excelling. She was now a certified search and rescue dog, her keen nose and unwavering focus proving invaluable in a region prone to lost hikers and unpredictable weather. Hearing Eleanor recount Nova's successful missions, finding a lost child, locating an elderly man disoriented by a sudden storm, filled David with immense pride. Nova, once an exploited breeding machine, was now fulfilling her true purpose, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of a dog's spirit when given a second chance. During one of these visits, as they watched Nova expertly navigate an agility course, Eleanor turned to David, a thoughtful expression on her face. "David," she began, "Nova's journey, your dedication, it's been truly remarkable, and you have a natural way with these dogs. And Snowy, she's exceptional. Have you ever considered getting involved in something more formal? Something beyond your patrol duties?" David looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean, Eleanor? Search and rescue." She stated simply, "Or canine work. You have the discipline, the patience, the understanding of these animals. And Snowy has the drive and the lineage. With her potential and your dedication, you could do incredible things together. Think about it. You could save lives just like Nova does." The idea settled in David's mind. A seed planted in fertile ground. Canine work? It was something he had always admired from afar, respected, but never considered for himself. It was a specialized field, demanding intense commitment and a unique bond between handler and dog. But as he watched Nova, her muscles rippling as she soared over obstacles, her eyes alight with purpose, he felt a powerful pull. And then he looked at Snowy, who had trotted over to him, leaning against his leg, her eyes gazing up at him with utter devotion. He imagined them together, a team, serving their community in a new, even more profound way. He mulled over Eleanor's suggestion for weeks. He researched K9 units, spoke to officers in other departments who worked with police dogs, and read countless articles about their training and their invaluable contributions. He realized that this wasn't just a career shift. It was a calling. It was a way to integrate his passion for animals with his duty to protect and serve. Finally, he approached his chief. He laid out his proposal, detailing Snowy's potential, his own commitment, and the significant benefits a K9 unit could bring to their small, rural department, from tracking missing persons in the vast wilderness to assisting with drug detection and suspect apprehension. He highlighted the newfound community support for animal-related initiatives, arguing that a K9 unit would be a powerful symbol of their department's commitment to safety and justice. The chief listened, initially skeptical, then intrigued. The department was small, their budget limited, but David's passion was undeniable, and the success of the Nova case had given him a certain persuasive power. After several meetings, and a careful review of budget possibilities and training requirements, the chief made a decision. "All right, Miller," the chief said, a rare smile on his usually stern face. "You make a compelling case. And frankly, with all the positive press from the Blackwood case, the town council might actually go for it. We'll start with a pilot program. You and Snowy, if you can get her certified, and prove the worth. We'll make it official." David felt a surge of elation. Thank you, Chief. You won't regret it. The path was challenging, demanding a level of dedication David hadn't known he possessed. He and Snowy embarked on an intensive K-9 training program, often traveling to a specialized facility several hours away on his days off. They learned tracking, scent detection, obedience in high-stress situations, and protection work. It was physically and mentally exhausting, but every breakthrough, every moment of perfect synchronization with Snowy was profoundly rewarding. Snowy, with her innate intelligence and drive, excelled in every aspect of training. She was a natural, a true working dog, blossoming under the challenge and the constant bond with David. Her playful energy transformed into focused intensity, her gentle nuzzles into powerful expressions of loyalty. She was no longer just a rescued dog. She was becoming a highly trained police K-9, a partner. David's relationship with Snowy deepened even further. They were more than just handler and dog. They were a true team, communicating with subtle glances, silent commands, and an unspoken understanding that transcended words. The scars of his past weariness and the initial trauma Snowy had endured faded into the background, replaced by a shared purpose and an unbreakable bond forged in kindness and honed by dedication. The long nights of the initial blizzard, the desperate cries of the pups, the image of a freezing mother dog, they all seemed a distant memory. Yet they were the very foundation of this new, extraordinary chapter in his life. David Miller, the quiet, unassuming officer, had found his true calling, thanks to a German shepherd mother and pups who were freezing in the snow, and an act of kindness that truly changed everything. The K-9 training was an intense, demanding crucible that forged an unbreakable bond between Officer David Miller and Snowy. Every morning, before the sun had fully climbed above the tree line, they were out, running drills, practicing scent work, and perfecting their communication. David learned to read Snowy's subtle cues, the twitch of an ear, the flare of a nostril, the almost imperceptible shift in her tail, understanding her thoughts and intentions long before they became overt actions. Snowy, in turn, learned to anticipate David's commands, reacting to his hand gestures and quiet voice with lightning speed and unwavering precision. The training facility was a world unto itself, a place where highly skilled handlers and their canine partners pushed the boundaries of their abilities. David, initially intimidated by the expertise surrounding him, quickly proved to be a natural. His quiet patience, coupled with Snowy's exceptional intelligence and eagerness to please, made them a formidable team. Snowy, once the tiny, shivering pup he'd pulled from the snow, now moved with an athlete's grace and a working dog's focus. She was disciplined, tenacious, and utterly devoted. During the rigorous certification process, they faced numerous challenges, simulated search and rescue scenarios, where Snowy had to track lost individuals through dense wilderness, often in challenging weather conditions, obedience drills under extreme distractions, testing her focus amidst loud noises and tantalizing scents, and the demanding protection work, where Snowy's inherent protective instincts were honed into precise, controlled responses, ensuring both her safety and the safety of the public. David remembered the soft, fearful whimpers of the abandoned pup, and now watched her transform into a powerful, confident K-9, a guardian. The final certification trial was grueling, a culmination of months of relentless effort. David felt the pressure, not just for himself, but for Snowy, for the chief's trust, and for the entire department. But Snowy, sensing his resolve, performed flawlessly. Her tracking was impeccable, her obedience sharp, and her protection work executed with the perfect balance of power and control. When the head trainer announced, Officer Miller and K9 Snowy. Certified. David felt a surge of triumph and an overwhelming sense of pride that brought tears to his eyes. He knelt, pulling Snowy close, burying his face in her thick fur. She licked his cheek, her tail wagging furiously. They had done it, back in Northern Woods. The news of their certification was met with enthusiasm. The local newspaper ran a front-page story, "Local Hero Officer Miller and K9 Snowy Bring New Hope to Northern Woods." The article detailed Nova's rescue, the prosecution of Thorne and Blackwood, and the incredible journey that led to the creation of the department's first K9 unit. It was a story that resonated deeply with the community, a symbol of hope and progress. The pilot K9 program was officially launched. David's patrol car was outfitted with a specialized kennel, climate control, and all the necessary equipment for a working K9. Snowy became a familiar and beloved presence in the town. Children would point and wave as David's cruiser passed. Recognizing the magnificent German Shepherd in the back, community events often featured demonstrations by David and Snowy, showcasing her incredible abilities and educating the public on the vital role of police dogs. Their first real call came during a particularly heavy snowfall in late winter. An elderly hiker, disoriented by the sudden whiteout, had gone missing in the vast, treacherous forest bordering the town. Time was critical. As temperatures were plummeting, search parties had been out for hours with no success. David and Snowy were dispatched. As they arrived at the trailhead, David could feel the palpable anxiety of the search team. He looked at Snowy, whose ears were perked, her nose already working the air, sensing the urgency. "All right, girl," he murmured, unhooking her leash. "Let's find him." Snowy immediately dropped her head, her nose to the ground, pulling David forward with steady determination. She moved with an almost ethereal grace through the deep snow, her focus absolute. David followed, trusting her implicitly, reading her body language for every subtle change in scent, every indication that they were on the right track. Hours passed, the cold bit at David, but the sheer dedication of Snowy kept him going. He thought of Nova, her mother, a search and rescue dog, embodying the very same strength and purpose. Suddenly, Snowy stopped, her tail giving a rapid, excited wag. She pawed at a snowdrift, then looked back at David, letting out a sharp, decisive bark. David rushed forward, digging frantically beneath a thick blanket of snow, huddled against the base of a frozen tree. Was the missing hiker, semi-conscious and suffering from severe hypothermia? "We found him!" David yelled into his radio, his voice hoarse with relief and exertion. Paramedics rushed to the scene as they stabilized the hiker. Snowy nudged his cold hand with her nose, a soft whine escaping her throat. It was a quiet moment of empathy, a testament to her gentle spirit even amidst the intensity of the rescue. News of the successful rescue spread like wildfire. The K9 unit was no longer just a pilot program. It was an indispensable part of the department. Snowy became a local hero, her image adorning the front pages of newspapers and the screens of local news channels. David, too, received commendations for his dedication and leadership. His life, once defined by routine and a creeping weariness, was now imbued with a profound sense of purpose. He was no longer just responding to calls. He was making a tangible difference, often in life or death situations. And it was all thanks to Snowy, the tiny pup who had survived against impossible odds, and her resilient mother. Nova, the impact extended beyond the K9 unit. David, drawing on his experiences, became a passionate advocate for animal welfare legislation. He regularly partnered with Sarah and Eleanor, speaking at conferences and community events, sharing their intertwined stories. He talked about the silent suffering of animals, the profound impact of kindness, and the incredible potential that lies within every creature, waiting to be unleashed. He became a living embodiment of the positive change that could come from facing injustice head on. One warm summer evening, David sat on his porch. Snowy curled contentedly at his feet, the sound of crickets filling the air. He looked down at her, stroking her soft fur. She lifted her head, her deep brown eyes meeting his, full of an unspoken understanding. He thought back to that night in the blizzard, the desperate pleas of a mother dog, the fragile lives he'd held in his arms. He remembered the chilling discovery of the puppy mill, the raw anger he'd felt, and now, the quiet peace of this moment, the warmth of Snowy's presence, felt like a full circle, a profound completion. He had started as a man burdened by the weight of the world. Quietly doing his duty, he ended up transformed. His heart opened, his purpose redefined. The kindness he had shown that freezing night had not only saved lives but had ultimately redeemed his own. It was a powerful, undeniable truth sometimes. The greatest changes come from the smallest acts of compassion, setting in motion a chain of events that alters everything. Years passed, weaving a tapestry of shared moments and quiet triumphs for Officer David Miller and K9 Snowy. The initial blizzard that had brought them together faded into a distant memory, replaced by countless sun-drenched days and crisp, starlit nights spent in shared purpose. Snowy was now a veteran K9, her muzzle showing the first subtle flecks of white, a testament to her years of dedicated service. Her keen intelligence and unwavering loyalty had saved lives, brought solace to families, and served as a powerful symbol of justice and compassion in northern woods. David, too, had changed. The weary, somewhat jaded officer who had once simply moved through his routine was gone. In his place stood a man with a quiet strength, a deep well of empathy, and an unshakable belief in the good that could be found in the world, even amidst its shadows. His hair was grayer, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, but they were lines etched not by exhaustion, but by the profound experiences that had shaped him. Their K9 unit, once a pilot program, was now an integral and celebrated part of the Northern Woods Police Department. Snowy's reputation preceded her. Her name was synonymous with successful tracks and reliable support. She had assisted in numerous missing person cases, located crucial evidence in complex investigations, and provided invaluable backup in high-risk situations. Her presence often de-escalated tense encounters, her calm demeanor and imposing presence commanding respect without aggression beyond their duties. David and Snowy became local legends. They were featured in national publications, inspiring stories of resilience and the remarkable bond between handler and dog. They visited schools, where Snowy, with her gentle nature, patiently allowed children to stroke her fur, while David spoke about responsible pet ownership, the importance of empathy, and the vital work of police K9s. He always made sure to share Nova's story, a powerful reminder of how one act of cruelty could lead to such widespread positive change. The Northern Woods Animal Shelter, under Sarah's tireless leadership, continued to flourish. The Nova's Law legislation, directly inspired by Blizzard's rescue and the Blackwood case, had been successfully implemented across the state, leading to a significant reduction in unlicensed breeding operations and a marked improvement in animal welfare standards. Sarah often credited David, and by extension, Nova and Snowy, with providing the spark that had ignited such widespread reform. The shelter now had state-of-the-art facilities, a growing team of dedicated staff, and a reputation as a beacon of hope for abandoned and abused animals. Eleanor Vance's life had also been irrevocably touched. Nova, her beloved Nova, was now a celebrated search and rescue dog. Her skills recognized throughout the region, Eleanor, in turn, became a fierce advocate for working dogs and responsible breeding. Often collaborating with David and Sarah on educational initiatives, their shared history, born of a traumatic event, had forged an enduring friendship based on mutual respect and a shared passion. David often thought about the other pups from Nova's litter. He'd received updates from their families over the years. Frosty, still thriving on her farm, had become an excellent companion for the children. Blizzard Jr. was a beloved family pet, a testament to the joy a well-loved German Shepherd could bring. And Winter, the quietest, had remained a loyal and comforting presence for her elderly owner until the end of her days, providing solace and companionship. Each life, once teetering on the brink of oblivion in the snow, had blossomed into something beautiful and meaningful. As Snowy approached her twilight years, her once boundless energy began to mellow. Her steps grew a little slower, her fur a little whiter around her ways. Intelligent eyes. David noticed these changes with a gentle ache in his heart, cherishing every moment, knowing their time as an active K-9 team was drawing to a close. The department, recognizing Snowy's incredible service, prepared for her retirement with honor. The day of Snowy's retirement ceremony was a sunny, poignant occasion. The entire community turned out fellow officers. The chief, Sarah from the shelter, Eleanor Vance and Nova, and even the families of Snowy's siblings. David, standing proudly beside his partner, accepted accolades and a special commendation for Snowy's years of selfless service. He looked at Snowy, whose tail still wagged with gentle enthusiasm, sensing the love and respect surrounding her. She had been more than just a dog. She had been a partner, a hero, and a profound teacher. In his speech, David spoke not just of Snowy's bravery, but of the deeper lessons she had taught him. He recounted the story of that freezing night, the desperate mother dog, and the tiny, freezing pups. He spoke of the shock of the puppy mill, the fight for justice, and the unexpected turn his own life had taken. He emphasized the power of kindness, of choosing to see the vulnerability in others, and the incredible ripple effect one compassionate act could have. Snowy's story, he concluded, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his beloved partner, is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can be found, that resilience is a powerful force, and that sometimes the greatest changes in our lives come from the most unexpected places, like a German Shepherd mother and her pups, freezing in the snow, whose desperation led to an act of kindness that truly changed everything, not just for them, but for all of us. After the ceremony, Snowy retired to David's home, where she continued to live a life of comfort, love, and quiet contentment. Her days were filled with long naps and sunbeams, gentle walks, and endless belly rubs from David. Their bond, refined by years of partnership and love, only deepened in her retirement. David often found himself simply sitting with her, his hand resting on her familiar fur, reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had shared. The legacy of that cold winter night lived on, not just in the changed laws and the thriving shelter, but in the heart of a man who had been forever transformed. Officer David Miller, through his simple act of stopping on a desolate road in a blizzard, had not only saved lives but had found his own purpose, his own redemption, and a profound, enduring happiness. The blizzard's embrace had been cold and cruel, but the kindness it sparked had brought warmth, light, and an undeniable promise of a better world.